feet planted firmly apart and hands hanging loosely at her sides. She stared unblinkingly through her skydiving goggles at the bright landscape before her. Strapped to the back of the white, bespoke nylon Cordra and spandex wingsuit she wore was a small parachute. Beneath it, her custom-made body holster held her 2 stainless steel Sig Sauer P229 pistols and her twin side daggers. The red-tailed hawk cocked its head to the north. A second later, Alexa picked up the low-pitched hum of an approaching aircraft. She glanced at the Timex on her left wrist. The target was on time. From her covert surveillance over the last 2 weeks, she knew he would have left the Las Vegas airport exactly 40 minutes ago on his way to Palm Springs to make the drop. She started the chronograph on the watch, reached behind her back, and slid the size out of their sheaths. Half a minute passed. The aircraft's engine grew louder. Her watch beeped. Alexa took off toward the edge of the ledge and jumped just as a white Cessna 172 Skyhawk with a red fuselage and tail shot past the curve of the mountain to her right. The aircraft was around 5 years old and registered to one Abraham McIntyre. As she dropped toward the desert floor, she spread her arms and legs to open the wings of the suit, then turned and dived after the plane. She had practiced the jump a dozen times in the past few days. There was little margin for error. If the Cessna was traveling at a slower speed than it had been the previous 4 times she had timed it, she would overshoot in front of the propeller and be torn to shreds. As it turned out, McIntyre was a creature of habit. He kept the aircraft at a cruising speed of 122 knots and maintained a steady altitude. Less than 15 seconds after she cleared the edge of the cliff, she glided to the rear deck of the Cessna and stabbed the side daggers into the metal of the fuselage. The impact jarred her wrists, and the wind drag nearly tore her off the aircraft. The plane pitched backward and rolled, offering her a dizzying view of the desert far below when her body tilted with it. The engine roared as the pilot struggled to level the Cessna. She unclipped the wings of the suit and renewed her grip on the daggers. Moving the blades one at a time, she pulled herself toward the front of the aircraft and dropped down the trailing edge of the left wing. Steadying her feet against the strut and wheel fairing of the landing gear, she sheathed her left sigh and yanked the cabin door open. The pilot stared at her, goggle-eyed. "Abraham McIntyre, in the name of the Crovir First Council, I hereby arrest you on charges of," she started to say. McIntyre blinked and reached for the gun on the seat next to him. Alexa twisted to the left and narrowly avoided the bullet that whizzed past her chest. Frowning, she gripped the support strut, slipped the right sigh in her holster, and pulled a knife from the scabbard on her thigh. McIntyre blanched when he leaned inside the aircraft and cut his seatbelt. She grabbed him by the neck of his shirt. He wriggled desperately in her grip and aimed the gun at her head. Alexa raised her right knee and hook-kicked the weapon from his hand. A cry of pain left his lips when the gun fell from his fingers. She ignored it and heaved backwards. McIntyre screamed, knuckles whitening on the edge of his seat. A grim smile crossed her lips. She let go of the wing strut and fell away from the plane. His shriek of terror was lost in the wind as they dropped like lead weights toward the distant ground. Alexa tightened her arm around the man's neck and wrapped her legs around his waist before reaching behind her back and pulling the activation handle on her chute. It deployed swiftly behind her. McIntyre choked at the sudden deceleration. She reached for the steering toggles and guided them smoothly toward the desert floor. Halfway down, the red-tailed hawk dove past them with a shrill cry, likely on the trail of an unseen prey. She followed the bird with her eyes until it disappeared from view. 10 feet from the ground, Alexa let go of McIntyre. He hit the dirt with a dull thud and lay there, groaning. She landed a few steps ahead of him, steadied herself, and shrugged the chute harness off her back. She strode back toward the prostrate figure and stopped a couple of inches from his head. She unclipped her GPS device from her hip and studied it. They had touched down exactly 1.5 miles from her rental Jeep. A minute passed. Alexa stared at the man lying still at her feet. "Get up," she ordered coldly. McIntyre's hand suddenly snaked out and gripped her booted ankle. He yanked on her leg and tried to pull her to the ground. Her weight barely shifted. A sigh left her lips. She removed one of her cigs from its holster and shot him in the hand. His howl of agony reverberated against the nearby sand dunes. McIntyre scrambled wildly to his knees and gripped his bleeding appendage. "Ah, you bitch!" "Unless you want to lose your right eye, I suggest you get up and start to walk," she said in a dull monotone.